live. I think we're here.
Oh my god.
So
Hi.
Hi.
fun. I can't find my notes. Hi. Welcome to
Hi.
the
Hi everyone. How's it
Alt Drag
going?
Slags panel here at Stream Queens Con. I am your host, the Blade. If you are unfamiliar with me, sorry I can't speak. I am Stream Queen's resident punk rock vixen. Today, I have gathered these two lovely guests, and we are here to discuss things all alternative drag. And I'm going to give a brief summary, if possible, on the general idea of alternative drag. In my mind, I would say that that's just anything that fits outside the normalities that have been established by certain television shows about drag and anything just outside of the mainstream as it relates to drag. So I would like to give a moment for my panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Yovska. Can you give a brief introduction as to who you are, what you do?
Hi besties, my name is Yovska, drag creature, Canada's #1 sleep paralysis inducer. I'm a performance artist and I guess drag personality and I stream, I make videos, outfits, etc. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So Arson, would you like to introduce yourself to the class?
Yeah, thanks so much for spoiling my first name. Why don't you? No, I'm kidding.
Wow.
I'm so kidding with you. Hi, my name's Arson. I do drag here on Twitch. I make music. I love fashion. I wear fashion. I don fashion, if you
Ooh.
will. Um, I love a good cosmetic or two, and I'm like really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me and for moderating this panel. I'm excited to get into it and answer some questions.
Of course. So, before I delve a little bit deep into the thick of the panel, I just do want to take time to make a quick disclaimer in saying that um, anything that we discuss is not an attack on any other forms of drag. This is just simply a discussion on our perspectives from our unique perspectives on drag. It's not meant to attack anyone's art style. It's just us simply conversating on what it's like to be a little bit outside the box, if you will.
Oh, I was ready to attack everyone, bestie, but I'll hold
Well,
back.
be advised, I guess. If you feel dragged, you've been warned. So I would like to just start with a very simple opening question for each of you, and I'll go ahead and let Arson take this one first. How would you describe your drag?
I'm actually really happy that you asked this one first because when I think of alternative drag, a lot of times when I hear folks describe um, their own work in that sort of sphere, they define what they do in opposition to what goes on in I guess more conventional circles. Um, and what's interesting for me is I see that and I understand that and I have used that way those types of phrases to describe what I do in the past, but these days I identify more with a label that I like to refer to as post drag, and to me that is more about being in conversation with and in response to what's going on with drag as a whole. For those who don't know, because of the ways in which drag has proliferated, become more popular with more mainstream audiences. Drag sort of has this new canon of ideas and conventions that are attached to it, and a certain set of expectations that when people go to a drag show, they expect drag artists to adhere to. Um, and what I like to do is I like to learn what those are, understand what those are, and question why those things are the way that they are through the work that I do. So I guess to summarize, most of what I do in this sphere is in loving, but also I guess um loving but also concerned um response to everything that happens around me creatively.
I love that. Yovska, same question. How would you describe your drag?
I would describe my drag as kind of like a stuffed animal a little bit. You know, I work a lot with like plush work. I do a lot of stuffing. And so that really informs, I guess, the idea behind my character and kind of the world surrounding it that I try to design in my head for where my characters fit in. And I tend to describe my drag as like monsters with a dash of fashion because I feel like I try to do the minimal in terms of like identifying with what people consider drag. So, you know, maybe I'll be like, I don't know, a box, and to make it drag, I'll put titties and some heels, and I'm like, okay, we'll call it a day, you know. So I think for me, it's very like comes from a very conceptual sort of viewpoint, but I also try to be very surrealist about it, and I kind of like the discussion sometimes around my work, whether or not it's drag or not, and whether it is or not, like I don't really care. That's what I'm labeling it as added because of the work that I present my work in, like the spaces that I present my work in, if that makes any sense.
It really does because I think I feel like a weird like the what I feel like in a weird way what I do on Twitch is and I that's why I kind of relate to that because I feel like sometimes your what you like bring to the table can also be a form of like being alternative drag besides just your like your physical presentation because Arson can attest to this. What I do I think is kind of unique. Um I'm not gonna say I invented it, but like I don't see anybody else on the platform doing it. For those of you who don't know and who aren't familiar with me, I basically do like once a month or every other month what I call visual art shows, short films, whatever you want to call it. So I think sometimes just the whole like presentation beyond just what you look like can also be considered, different or unique. Which brings me into the segue of my next question, actually. How would you say that your drag differs from the common perspective of what drag is? And that's open for anyone, whoever wants to take it.
Um, I would say my work differs a lot, mostly because of my masked work. When I first started, there weren't a lot of people doing masked work. So, I mean, that's something like I wasn't really sure if it fit into the drag realm or not. I was already doing mask work before I stepped into drag spaces. But then when I started seeing other masked, I guess, personalities in drag spaces like Monique Shame or Pissy Pussy, I don't think they consider themselves a drag personality though. But like, I mean, just seeing those kind of characters in club spaces, drag spaces, I'm like, oh, I can do that too. So I think that's kind of cool, and what's kind of like drove me into step into a drag space because I consider my work drag, not necessarily just because of the visual aspects or whatnot, but because of the spaces that I embody or that I take space in. And so since I take space up in drag spaces, I consider myself a drag performer.
Love it. Arson, would you like to add on to that question?
Yeah, can you remind me what the question was?
It was how do you think that your drag differs from the common perspective on drag?
I'm so excited to be able to answer this question. So, the reason I say that is because um I recently heard a quote from someone who was on one of the large television shows that we speak of that is a race of the drag variety, and they said you don't need money to do drag, but you need money to do drag race. And I thought that was a really interesting, like that's something that I've felt for a very long time, because I'm someone who comes from a background that like I can't necessarily afford to do drag at a loss. Like I'm not necessarily the type of person who has the means to go out and buy really nice outfits or have really nice outfits commissioned for me. And because I'm working so much, you know, making outfits for anyone who doesn't necessarily know, just because you have, you know, fabric doesn't necessarily mean you have the time to construct everything. So like everything in a lot of ways is a time and money resource, lots of which I personally am lacking. So I have to find like other ways to make my drag work. And so I've sort of been working on embracing the limitations that I've been dealt rather than like battling them. So I have sort of melted into this idea of like minimalist drag, sort of like cleaning up the lines and simplifying things to be more striking in terms of their simplicity rather than their excess. Not to say that excess and, you know, visual muchness isn't it's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I think, you know, I've seen work from the both of you that like really like inspires me in that zone. And I love to watch that and observe that. And for myself personally, I've really loved just the idea of putting on like a simple sort of like skirt color blocked with a shirt with some like nice tights and like a really like well crafted piece of hair and just like showing up like that because I feel like I don't see a lot of other people doing that and it's like sets you apart in like kind of a weird way, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been that's been more of a recent development. So if you check me out elsewhere and you're like, that's not what I see, that's been more of a recent change. But I've been really loving it, and my wallet loves it too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with your sentiment that you don't need money to do drag. And honestly, like doing drag is not hard when you have everyone else doing everything for you. So I personally enjoy seeing performers that, you know, make their own stuff or, you know, plan their own performances or make their own mixes. And that's not to shade anyone that, you know, has the resources to pay for their drag. But to me, I'm more interested in performers that have the talent to make their own stuff, the resources, or you know, like they are able to come up with ways to be creative around that. Because I see it as a creative practice.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with having stuff made or whatever, because because sometimes you don't have the
Yeah, of course.
ability to bring your ideas to life, but I do agree that there is sort of like a wow factor when you realize someone is the they're their own costumer, their manager, their hairstylist, their makeup artist, or the whole package. There's something that's really like admirable about it. Um, so I would also like to ask a bit of this is the last of my more introductory questions. I would like to know from each of you individually how you would describe the concept of alternative drag.
I would say to me, alternative drag is drag that differs from, I guess, what would be the mainstream society norm of drag. So I would say that would be like when people imagine, oh, you know, like they're going for the female impersonation with like the wig and that. So I would feel anything that really differs from that would to me be alternative drag. So let's say like someone doesn't tuck and it decides to be hairy, I would consider that alternative drag. You know, stuff like that I would say. And I think we're starting to see like a big shift into that sort of drag as well because I think people are starting to be like, you know what, that's interesting too. I'd like to see something different as well.
Yeah, in response to that, I think too what's really interesting about the idea of alternative drag being a response to drag's conventions is that those conventions change over time, um, and have rapidly changed over time, if you ask me, especially with the ways in which I feel like there's a new season of whatever show like every couple of weeks. There's a new like Instagram trend, there's a new TikTok trend every other day. And it's sort of like it changes things very quickly. Like I remember when I first started doing drag, the idea that I was not wearing, quote unquote body, which for those who are not necessarily familiar, sometimes involves foam hip pads, maybe corsetry, maybe false breastises. Um, I never wore those. I have never worn those. If I wanted to, I would wear them because I am what, sickening. Um, but seriously though, I've never worn it, and so just for specific reasons to me, and for the longest time that was like something you just don't do, like especially if you're working in more sort of conventional clubs and you're like the token like alternative person who gets like thrown onto the lineup. um it, it would be so funny to like show up to dressing rooms and they'd be like, so you're just gonna like walk out like that, you don't like pad or anything? I'm like, no, it's not what I do. And now what's so funny is that like a lot of people who would be considered more prominent or more like people who a lot of folks would consider figureheads, especially of the newer guard, are folks who don't wear body. And so it's like really interesting how those like things change over time. And I think a lot of that is frankly due to the fact that alternative drag performers push those envelopes and make those types of things more acceptable for everyone to do. So I'm really curious to see, not only where things are now in terms of how mainstream drag functions, but where things, will go. Because, with the way that the world moves and the way the internet moves, and trends come and go, who can possibly predict what's going to happen 6 months, a year, several years down the line when it comes to drag? So that's always an exciting thing for me to think about.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
oh,
Oh, so I was gonna add something to what you said about like, people like sometimes judging alternative, like being like, oh, you're not gonna pad or you're not gonna this, and I feel like sometimes it becomes really gatekeepy or like classist at times even. Um, I feel like it's sometimes like a system to kind of keep power and that kind of like aesthetics in one area, so like a certain amount of people can like kind of work around all those gigs and stuff. So I remember when I first started, like I was not booked at all, but I would still dress up and like do my thing. And eventually you find people that really appreciate your work, or are gonna like actually be understanding of that. So yeah.
yeah, I really can relate to that because I remember when I first started, like, kind of being more interested in the idea of doing drag. I had a friend. We're not friends anymore. And this is why. They were a working drag performer, and I was showing them and no one since my presence on the internet is Blade, no one's like seen this, but when I first started doing drag, my presentation was like similar to what it is now. But this person was like, well, but I think you should shave your like facial hair off, and I think you should do your this way, and it's kind of weird that you don't wear lashes. So I started to kind of like change myself, and as I came onto the scene, and this is in public memory now, I looked a certain way, but I think at some point you just have to be like, who cares if I'm not padded, or who cares if I'm not wearing lashes? And because it's just kind of like, I agree with like the sentiment of like it's kind of classist, and I also think it's like ever so slightly misogynistic, because I'm like, first of all you're making the assumption that everyone who's doing drag is doing a female impersonation, but second of all, on top of that, you're assuming that nails, breasts, long hair, all of that is associated with being like, looking more feminine. So I really relate to that sentiment of like people trying to tell you this or tell you that, but here's the secret, besties. Just don't listen to it because you're a star on your own in your own aesthetic. Um, that being said, I'd like to move on to the next question, which is, and I'll go ahead and throw it Arson's way. What would you say is the general perception of drag as just a whole?
Like the entirety
Yeah,
of
like some straight cis man is walking down the street and you say drag.
Yeah, that's oh my gosh, that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm aware. I know how to make
Um, it's
questions.
I do know this about you. Um, I, you know, I'm gonna use my experience with family as an example. When I first told family that I was doing drag, they were entirely unsupportive because um uh they straight up they came out with it and they were like, honestly, we think you're a stripper. And first of all, that's like first of all, can we talk about the sex worker shaming? Like,
Yeah, that
no
part.
thank you. Like, we stand sex workers in this household. But also, like, maybe don't jump to that conclusion right away. Maybe like take a second to like think about what you're saying before you're saying it. I feel like we could all maybe use a little bit of a dose of that. My family is no exception to that. Um, they honestly, and I have gotten that feedback from other folks too. I remember when I was in school, I had a professor who, when they found out that I was doing drag, they pulled me aside and they were like, "Don't get stuck in that scene. That scene is a dead end. Like, you've got to do plays, you've got to do like musicals. Like, you can't get caught up in all of that." And so I was very impressionable. I was like, "Oh no." And then when I actually got to do it, I was like, "Oh, they were so wrong about that." So like there's this weird sort of, I think, implication or this preconceived notion that like it's this sort of like silly like novelty thing, and to a certain extent it can be, and there's nothing wrong with it if it is, but drag can be so many different things, that I think sometimes people have a very narrow minded view, and in kind of a weird way, I think the sort of popularization of drag in the mainstream has like widened that window to a degree, but almost made like a new window of like, here's what drag is supposed to be. Like, I feel like people have a better sense of it, but still not complete. So like we're getting there, I think. I think that's undeniable, but also like, come on, folks, like open your minds just a little bit. It doesn't just I mean, I have drag friends who like when I told them, because I don't really lip sync anymore. When I told them I wasn't lip syncing, they were like, "So you're quitting drag?" I was like, and these are like people who like work in drag. I'm like, I didn't say I was quitting. I said I was doing other things while doing drag. It can be so many different things. So like even within the community, sometimes the definitions can get really narrow. So I think there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but overall I think people can use a little bit of mind expansion here or there as a
Yeah.
treat.
Honestly, your story kind of reminds me a little bit also too, like when I like started doing this stuff, and like some teacher told me like not to focus on the bar stuff or this and this and this. I think there's still a stigma attached to the idea of doing drag, and that it's attached to like poor gays, that have to dance around naked for bills. And even if you do that, like there's nothing wrong with that. It's like it's a business endeavor. And it took a while, I think, even for my family to kind of like be accepting of it. And like at first it's funny. I had the opposite reaction to yours where they were more okay with it because my stuff was more artsy or avant-garde than it being like traditional drag, weirdly enough. But it still took them like a while to kind of understand what I was doing, and that what I'm doing is like, a business for me, and I'm making money off of this, and I'm trying to make a career out of this. So I think there's still a lot of stigma attached and a lot of confusion attached to it as well. And I think yeah, like I think it comes from a place of people's concerns that, oh, maybe they're not making money or this, it's kind of stuff like that. When sometimes it's not even just about that. It's about also fulfilling yourself on a more personal level too.
Yeah, because I part of my whole thing is just that I put out my content and my shows, and I make no money off of that whatsoever. It's just I think some people just it's your expression, it's your art, and it's not always when people are so fixated like on the money aspect of it. I'm like, but have you ever considered maybe I just like doing it? Maybe this is just fun for me.
Yeah, because there's also like a bunch of people that do this as kind of like their like creative release, and they have other jobs too. So whether you're doing it as your career or as your fulfilling expression or your fulfilling creative endeavor, like I don't know why people need to like rub their business into ours, every single time.
Yeah,
Yeah. I also think there's an element too of the idea of queer people unapologetically being their queer selves for adoration, for self-empowerment, sometimes for profit. Because there is this idea that, in order to make it ahead in society, a lot of folks feel like they have to squish what they are, who they are into, the dominant cis heteropatriarchal norms. And so they look at people who aren't doing that and are doing and who are being their out and proud selves regardless of conventions and doing so successfully. And I think there's an element of, I don't necessarily know if jealousy is the right word, but this idea that like I had to compromise myself, so you should have to as well. And so I think there's always a little bit of an element of that too, where it's like we have something that a lot of people want but feel like they can't have, and like just join us, besties.
yeah,
Yeah,
Like that's really what it
it's
comes down
funny.
to.
I feel like even with streaming, it kind of intersects in that same way. Where like if you tell someone, "Oh, I stream on Twitch or this and this and this," like sometimes they'll have like rude reactions and be like, "Oh, you make money from that?" Like literally, I had someone that I was in talks with to like do some video thing, and I was telling them that I couldn't do Sunday because that's when I do some streams, and the response was immediately like, "Oh, you make money from that?" And it was just kind of like a very like, excuse me the fuck? Like, even if I wasn't, that's my own fucking personal time, bitch. Like,
yeah,
safe to say I didn't work with them. Like, I fully canceled them. I'm like, I'm not working with you. I don't like the way you're talking to me.
yeah.
But it's just people have the audacity sometimes to, you know, just mind your own business, bitch.
No, people really have the like audacity because I'm gonna piggyback off of what Arson was saying and how people there's kind of like a weird I don't want to call it jealousy, but people tend to look at people who are kind of living their true selves and there's kind of like a just a weird hostility there. As someone who outside of drag is also very like punk rock energy, I have a mohawk, I have spiky clothing. I deal with a lot, like on like a day to day basis, of people either thinking it's really cool or being like, "What's going on there, sir?" And I just think it's interesting how people it seems like people are either in two lanes. They're either really appreciative of the weird and like artistic expression, or they're super anti against it, but it almost feels like their aggression towards it is buried is it's more from a place of suppressing themselves than it is like I'm angry at you because you're stunning.
Yeah, I to piggyback off of that as well. You know, I think there's also room, just as you mentioned, to frame a lot of this like in like positive responses where I know that like no matter where I go and no matter where I do things, even if I feel like I'm going to a bar that really wants me to do a top 40 dancing number and I don't deliver it because I can't deliver it, even in those types of environments, there's always one or two people who will come up to you after the show and be like, "Thank you so much for bringing your authentic self to this, because this is the sort of thing that, this is the sort of like special flavor that that whatever the show was needed." And so, like, ultimately, that's a lot of why I do what I do. I am sure that you folks feel very similarly in that regard, where it's like no matter where you go, no matter where you do your stuff, there's always going to be someone who responds to it, no matter how unconventional, even if they don't end up expressing it to you. There's always this idea that someone's going to walk away either having their perspective pushed a little bit or having their perspective validated because someone dared to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, no, I mean, the amount of times I've gotten those kind of comments as well when I do my stuff, and they're like, "Oh, like you're my new favorite drag personality," or "I never knew this kind of drag existed. Like, I'm obsessed," or it's kind of like stuff like that where people think drag is just one way, and then I've had people be like, "Oh, I didn't used to like drag until I saw that your stuff could be drag as well, or this and this and this," So, it's kind of cool to get those kind of responses from people.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really perfect segue into what I wanted to kind of turn the conversation to, is that I think often in drag in general is kind of like a form of activism, but I think alternative drag is really like even more so often it like stems from a place of activism. So, that being said, how would you say each of your individual drags relate to the idea of activism, if any?
So when I started doing my things, I ended up doing my like the creation of my drag personality as part of my thesis piece when I was graduating from my bachelor's degree. And so basically, like I was talking about, I think the reason why I love doing the kind of drag that I do, turning into monsters or creatures or things like that. I talked a lot about, growing up as queer and immigrant, and a lot of times feeling like I didn't really fit in with people. I mean, I was already a weird kid to begin with, but I think also those added things kind of just made me feel a little more out of place sometimes. And so it came from feeling like I could relate more to monsters or aliens and things like that. And so when I started thinking of drag as my self expression, I'm like, well, if I want to do drag, I want to look like these creatures or these monsters and kind of feel like this sense of like empowerment or, getting those negative stereotypes and turning them into something positive for myself.
Yeah, what's interesting about this question is that I believe everything is inherently political. I think the idea of being apolitical is a political choice. And so in a lot of ways, drag is political. We say that within community all the time, just on the basis of us existing as out and proud queer folks, visibly queer folks, whatever that may entail. So to an extent, I think all drag is activist, whether you want it to be or not, whether you're willing to accept that responsibility or not. Um, but to that end, what's really interesting is that I used to I don't know, I used to incorporate very specific political messages into my work. And what I found was that, um, and this is just me speaking from personal experience, the more I sort of um, phrased things in the abstract, the more I sort of zoomed the lens out and sort of made work that poses more questions than solves answers, the more that I was able to more comfortably incorporate politics and activism into my work without necessarily coming across as preachy, because there's times to learn and there's times to be educated. And when folks go to drag shows, I feel like they don't typically go for that specifically unless it's, themed around that sort of deal. So my approach has usually just been to like subtly sort of sprinkle that in and maybe make that a part of the inferred narrative that's happening, but not necessarily like spelling it out for folks and maybe leaving them to draw their own conclusions in that regard. Maybe they do find something activist about the work they do that I do. Maybe they don't see it at all and maybe like, bring their own sort of narrative into it. I love the type making the types of things where people bring their own stories and their own life experiences and superimpose that into whatever I'm doing. That's my favorite kind of thing to do, is like finding something where it's like some of the questions are answered but not all of them, and then with that being said, making sure that the like quote unquote real activists in my life, those who are doing like on the ground, very specific, very intentional, organizing, mutual aid, community support types of things, making sure that, you know, whatever platform we have, whatever platform that I have access to, if I'm interested in getting folks involved with an activist cause, to then redirect attention to those folks who have been doing that work for years and years and years, and who are much more experienced and knowledgeable in those types of topics than I ever could, because it takes a village to make that sort of thing happen. And you know, my expertise is in drag and artistic performance, and so I'm happy to share the mic with folks who may be better informed about other types of things.
Yeah, I feel like I can relate to that sentiment as well. Like, I don't like for me, like I think the world's already so depressing as it is. So when I do drag, I prefer to kind of be more light, like a little more lighthearted about things. Like I feel like my presence enough is like a political statement in itself as a drag performer. So I like to be, you know, I think there's definitely a time and place when you need to get political, but you know, like I like to be more. I like to focus more like entertaining people and creating a safe environment for everyone. That's how I like to approach my kind of style, as well.
I feel like I just want to add on to this. I feel like I almost come from the complete opposite side of that perspective, and I think Arson, of like seeing my shows, can agree to this. Maybe that I'm kind of more on the side of like I put it in your face. Like I'm not very like, oh, maybe Black Lives Matter. I'm like, no, Black Lives Matter, and you need to get on the program with that. Um,
Yeah,
I'm very upfront about it, but at the same time, I kind of agree to that statement of like there's a time and a place, because when you roll into what I'm doing, you know that's what you're there for. It's not like I'm bamboozling you with like all these social messages. And that's not to say that I don't like have fun either. I've definitely done
yeah.
performances that are
No, I
more
think
just like me being like sexy or whatever, but I do think it's
I
kind
think it's
of like, well, I'm not gonna lie. Let's not act like I'm not a whore sometimes. like,
no, I think
let's
it's
just be
definitely
honest
like
about it. Um,
it's like it's necessary to have people like that for sure, you know. Like activism is still a big part of what drag is, you know, and I think a lot of you know, big big movements we had for like, you know, gay rights and things like that. Like I think drag queens have been at the forefront of that. So, you know, I think it's something necessary. People should still be doing it. Um, I'm just saying, I know for me, like I'm not the best at wording things, so I'll leave it to the professionals like you know.
no, like I agree with that though, because I think not everybody should be expected to be so vocal. But I don't share a lot about my personal life online, but like what I will say is I think because my personality and my line of work, which is like journalism, which is so vocal and so like listen to me, is why when it comes to drag it kind of carries over. Except when it comes to drag, I'm a little bit more like aggressive about it. Um, so leading off of that, I would like to ask if you have ever felt like, because of your drag aesthetic and it differing from what is considered to be the norm, the famous word, um, have you ever felt like you've been treated differently in the scene, or maybe you're not getting the same opportunity as others, or anything in that type of vicinity?
I would say before Dragula, like before having been on like on television or whatever, like I used to be, I think, overlooked a lot, or you know, like I felt like a little bit out of place sometimes. And sometimes you can just tell by people's energy when they talk to you, like it feels like a little condescending sometimes when they're like, "Oh, you're wearing that or you're doing that," you know. And like now after having been on Dragula, like that alternative whatever show, like their whole perspective changed because I was on TV, you know. But to me, that feels super disingenuous because I know if I hadn't been on TV, they probably would still be weird about it. So that's something interesting to me that people will act like that until they feel they can gain something from you in some manner. So to anyone out there that's trying to do alternative drag that's feeling out of place, just know that as soon as if you were able to like get something like get on TV or something like that, Those people are fake as fuck, and they're not worth it, Basti.
Yeah, I mean, I told a very specific story yesterday during the setting oneself apart panel where like I have receipts on this. Like I have very specific experiences with names and faces, you know? So yeah, that's definitely something um that I've encountered. And what's been really fun is to experience that and decide to just like do what I do really, really well and build a following really, really well to the point where, like, even if you don't like what I do, if you're looking to turn a profit at your local venue, you're going to want to book me. So, like, you
Yeah.
kind of have no choice, Queen,
I,
because,
I,
like,
I think the
I've
best
got it.
revenge is just to keep doing it, honestly. That's the best revenge, Basti. Longevity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like it's so funny to watch people come around and, you know, just like Yovska said, sometimes it unfortunately does have to happen, or a lot of times does happen when you sort of built something that is maybe more capitalistically profitable, and maybe you have a little bit more clout, and so people are willing to jump on that train. But doesn't make it any less fun when it happens because it's like, you know, I have like text messages from like 2 years ago, you
Yeah,
Oh,
know,
it's
it's
like
saying I remember shit.
it's not like my drag changed drastically in like 1 year, So it's just kind of like, okay. That's why, you gotta keep doing your thing, and eventually you'll find your successes and things that other people, won't have because they're stuck in a different mentality.
Yeah, just like do what you do as well as you can possibly do it. Make strong choices, make bold choices, make memorable choices. And the more consistently you can make that happen, literally everything else follows.
yeah, and I think I kind of want to just like add on to what you just said in that the last thing you ever want to do to yourself is to use other people as like a validation for what you're doing. If you're satisfied with what you're doing and you feel good about what you're doing, you don't need those other people to see you for you to feel comfortable in what you're doing. I know it's kind of like easy to, but it's not. You shouldn't. Don't place your self worth or your value as an artist on the thoughts of other people, because I actually also have receipts about something that happened too. It's been since deleted from Twitter, but yeah, I had a very similar instance to that story you shared yesterday, where I'll just say I wasn't a stream queen and somebody had no interest in me. And then I was a stream queen and they were like, hey, bestie, remember that lineup we wanted to have you in that we rejected you for? It's suddenly open. And I was like,
Not this.
Blade is subtweeting on a main,
I
everyone.
love the
well, it was
tea.
Run and
literally, no, this
hide.
isn't like drama or tea because it was like
No, it's
literally
okay.
on Twitter.
I'm
But
just messy.
Yeah.
so going off of that, my next question is, have you ever felt like, we've discussed how people treat you because you are so outside of the box. Have you ever felt though that someone has wanted to involve you in something or have you make an appearance not because they see the value in you, but because you're almost like the token. Like we have to have one weird person.
I would say at least 50% of the time.
Oh
And
wow.
I have to be really, and I actually experience this more with music than with like drag performance specifically, just because I feel like people when they go on Instagram or Twitch and they see me, they like know what they're getting. Whereas like sometimes people don't necessarily, I know when people haven't taken the time to listen to my music work because they'll message me and they'll be like, hey, we want you for this type of event. And it's like, oh, so what do you want? And they're like, we want something that's like light and sort of breezy and like background music that, you know, appeals to, you know, a wide array of people. It's like, Queen, I play like loud, like distorted pots and pans music. Like that is not what I do. That is never what I've done. And so I actually have gotten to a point where I have to be very specific about what they're looking for me, unless I've worked with them in the past. Because in no way, shape, or form am I interested in compromising my vision to a certain extent. Part of what I love is that, like, if I'm asked to do something maybe that pushes me outside of my comfort zone, I loved the challenge of like finding where myself and that comfort zone like can meet in the middle, and where that sort of like can make a new thing. But if someone were to ask me to be like, you need to completely change this and it needs to be this specific thing, I'm like, for music, I'm like, get a Spotify playlist, because that's not you are not looking for me specifically.
You said, sis, that exists. You don't need me.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I do think that's interesting, though, how, I mean, it's kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, though, how people really do have that sense of, like, audacity, I guess you could call it, to where they feel like they can even suggest that you change anything, like, as if it's their thing to change, because that's kind of one of my
Yeah.
major issues with a certain television program. We're not going to
Yeah.
name names, but we'll just say certain type of performers that make their way onto certain types of shows get certain types of critiques that are not the same critiques the other contestants get.
Yeah.
That
Honestly,
was
it's like
me
a
trying to
thing
say
where
that in the
like
most non-direct way possible.
not this. Honestly, like with the whole thing with the booking, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure like at some point I've been like booked as like the weird performer, but like honestly, I don't really care. Like if you're gonna pay me money, then sure, babes. And if you want me to do something specific, then I'm probably gonna ask for more money, because that's what you're asking me to do, something that I don't usually do. So if you want that, I'm not afraid to like up the price on you or whatever, right?
Yeah, but
You gotta also, I guess look out for yourself in that sense. If someone's trying to get you to do something you don't usually do, then put a price on it. Like at some point you're like, okay, well then pay me this price. Like I don't know. That's kind of how I think about things as well.
Yeah, it's all about due diligence. Like if someone's booking me and I mean, my stuff is out there, like, but you can like you can take looks at me on Instagram, you can watch my Twitch streams, you can hear my DJ sets. Like if you haven't heard those and you want me to do something and I bring exactly what I do every single time and it's not what you're looking for, then like joke's on you, sweetheart.
yeah, it's very, very that. But I guess um, with my next question here, before we have to begin to wrap things up, is I would you say that though with alternative drag, there's kind of a we live in the age of the internet, which I mean has its many ups and downs, but would you agree to the sentiment that having that resource of the internet and being present on the internet makes what you do a bit more rewarding because you're able to attract that audience of people who are actually interested in what you bring to the table?
I would say absolutely. I think due to the fact that you can reach so many audiences, I think it's one of the best times to dabble in alternative drag and things like that, because I feel like it's also a little bit easier for alternative drag performers to get some like go viral or get some clout, because what they're doing is so out of the box. So sometimes even if like I make a TikTok about something, like like I know that sometimes they might pick up because people will be like, what the fuck am I looking at, and I'm like, well, cool, I don't mind that, because I know every now and then there's gonna be people who like see it and they're gonna be like, oh my god, I love this kind of thing. And it's a way that I found so many new performers or personalities that I've like been inspired by because of the internet. Like finding unique personality, even like the fact that we're able to have this sort of conversation, with people that we're not even in the same city. It's just like amazing. So I think we're on a really great track, I guess, for representation and alternative drag and drag in general.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like in I would say the before times, a lot of times, like before I was able to really sort of harness the power of the internet, a lot of times I my visibility would depend on someone else's vision of me, whether it was a booker, whether it was a show host, a promoter of some sort who had that type of influence, a venue owner. Like those were the people who were making the determining calls for who would be placed on stage. And so with the internet, especially with social media specifically, you know, as long as you're within terms of service, the going live button is always going to be there. The Instagram post button is always going to be there. So you don't necessarily have to conform to someone else's standards, be in two or three very specific people's good graces in order to find a stage for yourself, because the stage is on the internet. Now, granted, it's not the same for everyone because the internet is so saturated with stuff that, like, it's not like, you know, it's not like getting your first booking at a 200 seat theater versus, you know, your first, like, you know, going live session on Twitch. You're not going to be, you know, in front of 200 people unless there's some sort of like freak accident happening. There's many different, like, obviously there are different mediums and there's different variables in that regard. But it is very empowering to have that available because you end up not having to compromise. You can go live, do whatever, log off, and as long as you did what you wanted to do, congratulations, that's a success.
Yeah, I really like that resonates with me because I remember prior to me being like a stream queen and like starting my streaming journey, I was very like I felt kind of like an outsider because I wasn't really interested in doing gaming and I didn't want to just like put makeup on and just chat. And there's nothing wrong with people who do that. I love people who do that, but like every time I tried to do it, I was just like, no, like this isn't I don't really like this. And so I started, you know, like producing my shows and putting those on. And it's just really fulfilling when you actually find those people who are invested in what you're doing and willing and like compliment you on that. And not that compliments are necessary, but it's a little bit more, I think it helps you continue with your art and feel more comfortable in continuing your art. You don't have that same level of like, is this crowd gonna like what I'm doing? You know, every time that go live button turns on, you know, the people that are coming in are people who appreciate what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, arson is actually one of the reasons I still do what I do because you're so complimentary of what I have to do.
Well, you do what you do very well. I can't help it.
It's up for debate, but but no, I really agree. I think it's really lovely that we have this platform and this ability to be able to do what we do and also project that message out there.
And it works both ways too. These platforms are lucky to have us.
Well, that one I could agree with. Maybe not me, because sometimes I be pushing the TOS boundaries, but um, that being said, one of the final questions of the panel before I have us share a little outros here. I would just like to ask each of you, whoever wants to take it first can take it. If you had any message you would like to send out there to any little baby drag performers out there who want to get themselves started in more of a alternative route, what would you say to them?
Um, a big one that honestly that I would love to say because it bugs me every time that someone comes up to me and they're like, "I want to start doing drag, but I'm waiting to be booked so I can start it." And it's like, "No, babes, you need to just do it. You need to go out and do it. Just start your drag, even if it's in your room and you're taking photos. Just go out and do it because, you're not some like like you shouldn't be waiting for someone to necessarily book you because sometimes those bookings don't even like come that often. So I think you should just go out and try it and do your own thing regardless of whether or not you know how to do makeup, because at some point everybody did not know how to do makeup. So I think just lose the hesitation and just try it, because if you don't, you'll probably keep putting it off.
Very that.
Yeah, I would say uh don't do anything that your gut tells you not to do. If it feels bad for a reason. Um I would say I would say radically embrace your limitations and make your limitations part of your work. And also, I think there is a really, I struggle with this every single day. I've been doing drag for several years, and this never ever goes away. The question of what do I actually like to do and want to do versus what do other people want me to want and like. Telling the difference between those two things is sometimes so difficult, but is often the key and the answer to the next steps. And so as difficult as it is, really reach into the deep depths of your soul and learn what it is that you really want to do, because oftentimes it's at odds with what everyone is telling you in your ear you should be doing, and that's a really difficult thing to parse out.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that because I know I'm the moderator, but I would also like to project my thoughts on that too. Is that I really think it's important for you to. It takes a long time for you to develop a sense of like who you are as a performer and like what aesthetic you want to do, and if you're someone like me who kind of does have like a same face that I wear every time, it takes a while for you to get to that point of like, this is me, this is what I'm bringing to the table. Um, but I think an important step of getting to that point is you have to understand that you are uniquely special and to embrace your what you bring to the table as an individual. And I think a person that really helped me learn that message is Dear, the head of Stream Queens, because
Aw,
I feel like when I
we
initially
love
applied
dear.
for Stream Queens, I was not in tune with who I was as a performer, and I was not like, it was just clear that I wasn't like ready yet. And I imagine when I finally got into the team, that sense of like, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I do was more brought to the table. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my god, we love dear.
We
Dear
love
delivered
Dear.
my firstborn. Such an icon.
Dear actually did my taxes last year. I got a nice return.
Oh my god, that's
Oh my god,
amazing. I
thank you,
just love that.
dear.
I'm just glad Deer didn't sue me when I made that parody of her that's since been buried. It's been buried deep. You will not find it. So we have about a minute or so left. So before we leave, please let us know where we can find you. If you have anything coming up or anything you want to promote, any final messages, and we'll go ahead and go alphabetically. So Arson, take it away.
Hello, it's me, Arson Nikki. You can find me on all wherever quality social media platforms are sold at Arson Nikki. You can also find me on Farmers Only.
Farmers only?
It's look it up. Farmers
Oh.
Only. No. And yeah, I'm excited to see what the rest of the con has. That's what my weekend is.
Same. Um, Yovska, where can we find you and all that fun jazz?
Oh my god. Hi, besties. My name's Yovska. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and here on Twitch at Yovska, Yovska. We stream Sunday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. A lot of Identity V, sometimes some variety games. And yeah, come say hi to me sometimes.
Yes, please go and follow both of these creators. I'm so like beyond delighted they agreed to be here with my crusty self. But speaking of myself, I am the underscore blade on all platforms. I have no idea what's going on with my life, so I have nothing to promote, but I'm always working on something. So at some point there will be something. Um, with that being said, if nobody has anything else to say, I think we're ready to go.
Thanks so much for having us, Blade. This was a lot of fun.
Of
I know this was such a
course.
mood bestie. Thank you, Peppa.
Uh, Okay, Dola, take us away. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. It's been a lovely time.
Bye.
Bye. I'm just going to keep